All right, this is Todd Atkins, and I'm back with Miguel Iturrati, and we're doing another episode of the MMA Conspiracy Hour. And I'm here with Miguel from the MMA Museum Project, MMA Collector Project, which we'll talk about. And before we start, as always, check out our sponsor, Live to Fight. You can find them on Instagram at Live to Fight Design. If you use my promo code Todd Atkins, you can get 20% off your order, fighter banner, and gym banners. Now, today we're going to talk about, there's been some rumors that maybe Brock Lesnar would be the person that Francis Ngannou would debut against in PFL. So, Miguel, I kind of want to let you start with that. What do you think about those rumors?
We did a little research before the program, and we found out that it looks like Lesnar, and this sounds correct because a few years back, the last time Lesnar teased with returning to the UFC and he returned to WWE, this was a situation where he did it based around WrestleMania being the start and stop time of his contract. So WrestleMania just passed last month, and it looks like his contract may be up again. And so I could see Brock at home in Minnesota, making up fake internet names, to put out blurbs about how he might go to PFL, because that's who benefits the most from the rumors is Brock. If he's going to renegotiate with the WWE and the UFC, having another offer or having rumors of another offer help him immensely. And I don't, but at the end of the day, I think WWE saw him as a huge commodity. And now with the MMA angle involved, but the WWE being unified with the UFC in a new company, I think that they will match any offer. And I think that they should probably in their back pocket have the contractual right to match an offer on a guy like Lesnar. There's no reason why not, take the offer. If they want to match it, they match it, or you do better if you're Lesnar. So I think that that's all in play. And I don't think at the end of Lesnar teased the UFC and got more money out of the WWE. I think now he might tease the PFL and get more money out of the UFC WWE combination. Good for Brock.
The other thing, do you think this is something that I brought off the air? I think Lesnar's a risky match because he's such a good wrestler. Granted, he's older now, of course, but how important is it for Ngannou to fight someone he can beat in this first fight?
Lesnar, at this point, one of the things about Ngannou, because he was a late starter and things like that, is that, you get real veteran guys like Verdum or guys like that. They become real dangerous because they've got mat time on them. They've got time doing this over him. And that's not the case with Lesnar. Ngannou's actually the more experienced MMA fighter in that situation by a lot. So I think he can handle the takedowns. I think that Lesnar standing up presents no real threat to him. And when Lesnar kind of starts to feel the power that way and he starts to try to get the takedown, if he can't get it, it will be a short fight. If he can get it, the thing about him is he's 40-something years old. He's mid-40s, 44, 45. And if you look at him in pro wrestling now, in the when he was in UFC, you wonder because of the diverticulitis, we had seen a different version of him, but he did go through that disease. He did go through a recovery time where they say, you may never recover to 100%, then plus normal aging getting into his 40s. The fact is his pro wrestling has been very, very limited for years. Like to the point where not only is it limited in appearances and he gets large blocks of time off and is really considered a part-time wrestler, but also, how many times are you going to see him enter a match, hit 3 to 5 German suplexes, hit his F5, and that is it. He no longer even does any of the others. So I think his road to be ready for a real MMA fight against Ngannou is long, and he may not want to do it. Now, they come up with, and Lesnar would demand extraordinary amounts of money too. I don't think the PFL would want, I think Ngannou's their cherry signing, to now come back and got, maybe pay 3 times more. You know, if he's making 10 million a fight, Lesnar made 30 million for his UFC fight, is one of the rumors. So Lesnar, you know, if you're going to pay Lesnar what he's worth to be the A side of that match, Lesnar will listen. If not, you know, we're not even in the ball game. Lesnar doesn't need to challenge himself, you know, for bravado and take a $2 million payday for something like that. It's a whole different restructure of what they were planning. And you're counting on the fact that you could say, okay, there's your 30 million. And the UFC says, yeah, well, here's 35. And, you know, forget all that. Or WWE says, here's 35 for this, you know, this is what you got to do. And Brock will just be gone. So I have no faith that they'll get him. I would favor Ngannou in that fight at this point.
Let's kind of go the second person we've been talking about, which is Rico Verhoeven. So kind of for people, there's still probably a lot of people watch this show that aren't entirely familiar with Verhoeven. I mean, most MMA fans aren't big into kickboxing, but kind of explain why he was kind of the second name that came off of, you know, your head as a matchmaker, experienced matchmaker as you are.
You talk about a superior stand-up fighter to Ngannou. Now, does that mean Ngannou just comes in and tries to wrestle? Well, you know, he showed good wrestling against Gane, but, you know, Gane isn't exactly a guy who's wrestled his whole life either. So I think you have a good mix of a stand-up fight. And at that point, I think Verhoeven is a true threat. He's a big, younger, you know, he's the same age or a little bit younger. And, you know, since the semi-shield Ernesto Hoost era, he's the guy who's clearly risen to the top in the sport in the heavyweight division. You know, you had a real mix before, and he's sort of just about, you know, the consensus #1 guy there. So, you know, he hasn't lost in almost 10 years. And I think that because of their European ties and because that's part of the expansion that the PFL was going to do, that would be probably the biggest show they could do on the European continent, you know. Ngannou, you know, he's from France. You know, I think they did a UFC in France, and you know, do they put him in the headline spot, or do they let Verhoeven headline in Holland or in a big stadium, or not a stadium, not a 60,000 seat stadium, but they do a big show, 15,000 people, get a good gate, you know, with minimum ticket price being high, and they can pull that off in Europe, in Germany or Holland. You know, 15,000 people, I think, would come to see that fight. That'll give you a decent live gate. And then in the UFC, in the United States, Lesnar would help you on the pay-per-view end. You know, but again, you're going to try to advertise Lesnar and not and have to send a video crew to Lesnar's gym if you're even going to show him in your promos, because there's not a lick of video that you have in any PFL library or anything like that of this guy that you can use. That's going to be a factor in selling the fight, you know. So yeah, there's a lot to it there. I don't think Lesnar is the optimal opponent.
Let me ask you this though, kind of piggybacking off that. I would say obviously PFL's core audience is in the U.S. at this point. You know, how important is it for them to do it here, or you know, if they do a show in Europe, what's the trade-off there? You've been behind shows, obviously, with Bodog, so forth, hook and shoot.
You know, excuse me, I'm still skeptical about a lot of the PFL, you know, what they're talking about. You know, I listen to Dan Davis. He sounds like obviously, you know, one of those upper echelon business guys that, you know, talk a certain kind of language. I don't see a huge amount of depth of MMA knowledge. Now, is that worth everything? I don't know, but you know, the UFC always had that. You know, they were always the big company, the first company, the guy, you know, and then Dana now, if you're going to try to match him on experience, good luck. You know what I mean? So I think they have to be more corporate and less, you know. So now they're talking to me about things like, yeah, they decided, you know, they put Ngannou as the for the board in you know, their Africa expansion, which they had planned for 2027 and have now moved up to 2025. They got nothing done in Africa. Come on. You know, I mean, whatever's there is in preliminary talks. there is nothing guaranteed of any of that coming to fruition. And I'm of the opinion you have to show me. And other, the NFL tried to expand even to Europe and found it hard to gain a new audience where there are already people that have their fanaticism and stuff like that. You do have to sacrifice a little bit. In Africa, who knows what they're facing in terms of, regional powers and things like that. There are very rude, very real competitions of fighting in Africa, where they wrap their fists and punch each other, and there's a wrestling element involved and stuff like that. Who knows what you could do to sell a fight? But then now you're into the firm salesmanship of a fight, and you're away. I think Verhoeven gives them the most pure competition that I can think of right now, off the top of the head.
Right, but what I mean is, I think me and you feel like maybe Verhoeven's the most logical choice. If they did the show in Europe, does that hurt them as far as, they got this big signing because they wanted to get kind of a big pop in the US from it?
That's the thing. I'm of the opinion, and it's just my opinion, but I'm of the opinion that Ngannou, as a Frenchman, an African and a Frenchman, that he is not the A side of a major fight in the United States. And, I stick by that, which is why Tyson Fury and him because Tyson Fury will hold up the A side all day long. Deontay Wilder in the States, Deontay Wilder will bring whatever he brings. I saw something where his pay-per-views numbers are not that huge. So at the end of the day, that might be a fight that actually falls flat. And there you're talking about just letting him box. So for MMA, the interesting part about what Dan Davis said to me was that he promised that he'd heard the Fabrizio Verdun rumor, and that he promised to do better than that. And I think that that's very interesting. I think that's a good call. I think I'd like to see better than that. Verdun would be a little bit of a disappointment. And they could say, that he might do it in Brazil or in Mexico and a stadium and stuff like that. Man, stadium shows, I think there may be 5 guys on the planet that can hold up stadium shows. Canelo, Tyson Fury in the MMA world, the John Jones and Ngannou fight they could have maybe put in Dallas Stadium or at some point when they reach for that, But with Ngannou being the A side in the States, they're not going to reach that level. They're not close to that level. Lesnar might help them with that A side, but again, Lesnar has a little bit. He's mid-40s. He's coming off a bunch of flat years wrestling where he hasn't done a lot and showed me a lot of athleticism or moves in the ring. Maybe he's taking care of himself, but it doesn't look great. And he didn't want to compete last time when the UFC threw a boatload of money on him. He said, "Nah, I'd rather do this." And so money's the most important thing to him, and I think he'll get matched. He could help on the pay-per-view side, but again, then they're really Ngannou's a tweener. He's not, a huge draw that we can trace to, and where like he cracked the top 10 pay-per-views. If he did, it's because the other guy was, I can't. I just don't see him there. I don't think he's the draw.
Well, let's kind of move on to our third one that we were discussing. Now, people might be surprised by this. We have discussed a little bit on other episodes. We didn't get deep into it, which is Gordon Ryan from an intrigue. So kind of take it away with Gordon Ryan, because I know this was Miguel's idea, but it is an interesting idea. So let's go ahead and run with that.
Like the bottom line is if I was the matchmaker for PFL, and I've been in similar roles, but what you have to look at there is yeah, sure, I would love to do John Jones versus, I'd love to be the matchmaker to have signed that. But I physically, it cannot happen under the contractual world in which we live. Right. So you can dream up, anybody can matchmake in terms of like this guy versus this guy would be a great fight. The actual thing is getting it in the ring. I think Gordon Ryan is the most intriguing guy I see out on the radar anywhere. He's going through uh, some health issues right now where he's been in the hospital and undergoing antibiotic treatment for strep throat and having some cleanup work done on his nose and things like that. I don't think any of that stops him from competing within the PFL's time frame of 2024. So, the big news about Ryan is that I read somewhere he's making great money for a grappler, better money than most grapplers have ever made, or you can almost say better money than any grappler's ever made. But you're still talking about six figures in terms of some of his paydays, in terms of his paydays, and he accumulates a few of those, and yeah, maybe he gets $500,000. And that's terrific for a grappler. He's already raised the bar. But so how do you interest him? Well, $2 million for a starter to face Ngannou, a year to prepare, he's going to have to listen because it is enough of a raise from what he does now that he could be like, yeah, I'll dedicate a year to make $2 million. It would take me 3 years to do it grappling. So, and I think that becomes the classic grappler versus striker match. Gordon Ryan, he's young. He has a chance of being that kind of media guy that the other thing to me in that fight too, and same with Verhoeven is now as a company, you can't be like Dana where it's like, Dana, I want Chuck to win and I hate Tito and stuff like that. It's like as a company, you got to be prepared for this to go either way. And Gordon Ryan is a guy that if Ngannou all of a sudden, you're going to be like looking at 2 fights and done with him because, he went 0-1 and then you're not sure what you're going to do with him or whatever. Maybe you decide to stick with him and re-sign him anyway. But then you've got a guy above him. And I think Gordon Ryan's a guy that could carry that crown. Everything I see about him, behavior, the way he commands a room, I think that's important. I think, we're beyond, when you're talking about the millions of dollars that the PFL is going to put into this and stuff, we're beyond, just, well, we can figure this out locked in a room and we'll tell you how it went. No, this is about seeing it and showing it and putting it on a huge stage. And I think that Gordon Ryan could handle that.
Yeah, and he has talked about fighting before, it just never materialized. So this could be the time.
Yeah, I think he's the most classic matchup that there is. Verhoeven becomes another. Those are the 2 guys I think that make intriguing fights. Another name on my list was Sonny Bill Williams, who's a 37-year-old rugby legend. A little bit of a black eye in my list because up until November of last year, he was an undefeated boxer, also 10-0 as a heavyweight. But he took a loss in boxing to Mark Hunt. Hunt might be available, but again, now with Hunt, with Sonny Bill, you're getting an all-time rugby player, like considered one of the all-time best rugby players. And I think rugby it has a lot of street cred in terms of like tough, and I think, even if you wanted to do it, you could do that in boxing. It might be a way that would be an intriguing way to break Ngannou into boxing with a big fight, but a guy who's really not that much more advanced than he can be in that sport. So I think Sonny Bill would have been, it could still be, if Sonny Bill hasn't lost some of his gloss, and they're really looking at global expansion, I think a show in New Zealand or Australia, which are advanced first world economies at least, puts them on the market with that. And with Sonny Bill, believe it or not, you've got a guy who's a bigger name than Ngannou. People will watch it for Sonny, not for Ngannou, and then whatever happens, happens. But I think now you're into more of a show fight, like a Jake Paul style fight, as opposed to Verhoeven or Gordon Ryan, which I think would be legitimate tests. And I think the other guy that falls into that, we mentioned Mark Hunt. I want to mention Josh Barnett. We're doomed. Barnett. They're all about the same age. If you're going to put him in against a guy in his mid-40s, those guys may be available. They may want to do it. Barnett, I'm sure that he's crafty at this point at 45. It's just whether his body would be ready for a guy like Ngannou at this point. Does he feel he's going to have to take some damage and how that would work out for him. But if he could be motivated by money, Barnett would be good. But I don't think Barnett's a huge blast for the pay-per-view sales either. I think he intrigues me as a fight. And then the other name there is another name from pro wrestling, not Brock Lesnar, but Jon Moxley, who is the WWE rival, AEW's champion, or has held their belt consistently since that company started. He came from the WWE. He's known as a guy who's trained at times in MMA, and he's got that kind of rude WWE style where he'll bleed, and he's a guy that, though he's on top of the world in terms of contract and stuff, will still go do independent stuff and stuff. He's got a real street cred. But I think you're onto a show fight there. He's going to be a little smaller than Ngannou, and he's going to have to count on his wrestling to get him through, ground and pound. I don't see how it goes for him. But that might help him on the pay-per-view. But I don't think Moxley gets them over the hump in terms of, I don't think AEW's got too many 3 million pay-per-view sales. And I think that's what you want with Ngannou's fight.
And we go back to what Don Davis said, where you wanted to do better than Verdum. I feel like Barnett would be kind of right on par with that. So I think that kind of eliminates him. What about like Bobby Lashley?
Lashley's also a guy under WWE contract.
Yeah.
So I think that's going to really become the WWE is now in bed with the UFC, and you're talking about a company that, whether you like it, to give the PFL a little credit, what they've done here is the UFC is almost close to shutting the door down on competition. Really, that only a real court fight and somebody with the stomach for that is going to loosen them up. They're about to shut the door. And with this signing and the attention they've gotten, they put their foot in the door. They've refused to let it close. I don't think like I've said on multiple shows, I don't think the UFC is all that worried about them. Like, oh God, they're, next year we might not be the biggest company anymore because of the PFL's moves. That's not how the UFC is looking at this, but the PFL deserves some respect for getting into the argument here. But they've got still a long way to go. And again, Lashley would be a problem that I don't think they can contractually overcome. Bellator had an undefeated, I don't remember his full name, but he was a heavyweight wrestler that I know he trained with Lesnar. I know from being speaking with Travis View,
Cole Conrad.
Cole Conrad. Thank you very much.
Mm-hmm.
Cole Conrad might actually beat, if he's still young enough. He's at this point been a lawyer for X amount of years and stuff. But again, you got a year to prepare and a couple $1 million payday. And you got an undefeated guy there. But he's not Alexander Karelin. It's like Cole Conrad falls into that category of Verhoeven and Gordon Ryan, as to where you've got a matchmaker who's actually trying to test Ngannou in some way, shape, or form, and not just giving him a gimme fight. Moxley would be a show fight, and I think, some of the older guys, Hunt, Barnett, were doing. Once you get to mid-40s, we saw Fedor in his mid-40s. I'd rather have a better lasting memory of those guys than that.
Yeah, and the other thing is, I come back to what Don Davis said, he wants to do better than Verdum. That eliminates a lot of people right there, that we've kind of mentioned. Fedor, I would consider that to be right there at that point. He's kind of Verdum. Barnett, same thing. I think
the problem, the thing is here is what do you want to do? Do you want to attract attention? Okay. I think at this point, Fedor is such a blast from the past that people are going to be like, yeah, but can he win? He can't win.
Right.
And you do need the facade of somehow Ngannou is going to be challenged in this fight. Somehow the guy is going in there to beat him. And I think, like I said, in terms of combat sports that we recognize, if he goes to do boxing, I think that it would be excellent for him to start off with Sonny Bill. Let him do that in Australia. Let the PFL put their name and stuff all over it. Hopefully Ngannou notches a win. and then goes on to his really huge payday with Tyson Fury and or Deontay Wilder. Fury obviously being the first guy. And then after that's done, you've left Ngannou, hopefully, still on top of the world. And now he comes back to MMA. If he's coming back off a loss to Tyson Fury, he is in a must-win fight in that next fight. He does need to win. And that would be his first MMA fight back after X many years and stuff like that. So then we'll see what the PFL means by better than we're due. Gordon Ryan to me qualifies as that, but and you know, when you consider Werdun's never, when have we ever been saying like, oh wow, Werdun really, you're almost guaranteed 1 million pay-per-views. Never. He's a fantastic fighter, but he's never been a guaranteed $1 million pay-per-view or $1 million sale pay-per-view guy ever.
I think with us, me and you, Verhoeven and Ryan are the more logical people than even Lesnar.
Yeah, I think Verhoeven comes with enough of a reputation in his sport in kickboxing, and they have enough roots in Europe that I would qualify that as better than we're doing. A more intriguing match than we're doing. Yeah, I think you got a long way to educate the fans, but maybe there's some possibility of you working with people so that you can show Verhoeven's highlight reels. How are you going to sell the opponent if you don't own any of the footage of any of his fights? So that would be the problem with Bobby Lashley or Brock Lesnar or any, we're doing what you can't show is UFC fights. It's not like they're going to be like, oh, sure, go ahead. So Verhoeven gives them the possibility of putting the real machine behind him, putting him as the A side in Europe, and letting Ngannou go. Ngannou's a European. I think you've got a major European fight there, and let the European fight fans step up and show us that they can support a frontline number one, A-rated pay-per-view. And we'll see the American public, buys it 500,000 times. If that would be a huge success for PFL.
Yeah, and I think Gordon Ryan, like you said, it's not a household name among Americans, I would say, your average American, but among fight fans, it would be kind of a wow opponent.
Yeah, and of all the people we've mentioned, Ryan is the guy that I think if you start putting him in front of audiences that don't know him, he's the guy who might be the best at, Moxley. I don't think you can compare to Moxley in terms of microphone capacity, but Moxley at the end of the day is a professional wrestler, and that comes with, his talking aspect of it. He would talk up a fight, but it would be a show fight. Gordon Ryan would be a legitimate opponent that could possibly capture the imagination of the crowd and present you with an intriguing potential guy there. I think he's a guy with a huge potential in terms of social media still. I think he hasn't tapped that potential. He could be, he's not as big as Jake Paul is right now. And in terms of crossover stuff, I like Gordon Ryan's chops. I think he handles himself well. I think he's good on his feet. I think he's edgy in terms of, even things like his pimp slap of what was his competitor's name? Galvao, yeah. And stuff like that. I think, I think he shows that potential, that Masvidal bad boy, that sort of, potential there. And he may want to put that on full display on a real stage. I think that's what he presents in the Ngannou fight Ngannou's never going to be the big talker. You can't put him there. You have no footage of him. What are you going to, how many times are you going to show me hitting him destroying a bag or something? You know what I mean? They need somebody else with a sharp tongue or somebody with a video library or something that they can do there. And I think Verhoeven presents the capacity of showing his library, and Gordon Ryan also, but more better, Gordon Ryan presents you a social media guy that will carry the day.
Right, and he'll talk up the press conference,
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I think we've come up with the guys. They should watch the show because I think the two that we've settled on are probably the right ones for it.
Yeah,
People are talking about Lesnar, but to me, like you're saying, I mean, I know he'd bring a lot of eyes from pro wrestling and whatnot, and that they always settle for that. UFC settled for that with CM Punk and Brock Lesnar, but I think the two that it brings an element of more of an element of danger that I don't think Brock brings.
Yeah, no, I think at the end of the day, you talk about, like I said, doability. And I think that Brock Lesnar, without you able to, he's now 45. We haven't seen him really fight. And his in-ring action, you really wouldn't want to show anything from the last few years anyway, because he does the same series of moves every show. But you can't use any of that. So I think that you're extremely limited. Then because he's also a recluse guy. It's not like you can say, okay, we're gonna have to do a month-long press tour to hype this fight because we don't got fight footage of you. Then he's gonna say, okay, yeah, 30 million sounds about right for this. And the PFL is gonna have to think about that. I think at this point, Ngannou's the big signing. They've already guaranteed his opponent 2 million, which means are they really all of a sudden going to pony up 30 million for that opponent? I think that changes their finances so severely to try to bring in someone like Lesnar. And, again, I think at the end of the day, that's just folly because they're going up against a monster who will match.
I think that's a great thing to end on. So, as always, I want to let you kind of talk about the MMA Collector, the MMA Museum projects.
Well, there we are. MMA Collector on YouTube, MMA Collector at MMA Collector 74. Or you can look up the MMA Museum podcast. They're both on the same channel on YouTube. If you can hit like, share, and subscribe, we just do the memorabilia show, which is really fun. We've done 20 something episodes already in the books, and we just focus on a piece of memorabilia. This week we were looking at Mark Hall's long Mouye Do pants that he wore at UFC 7. So we have a lot of fun with the old memorabilia and bringing up history, and then the podcast is interviewing people. And we've got a couple of old guys, a couple of old friends of mine that we've had in the interviews these last couple of weeks. I'm trying to line up another couple of bigger names or newer names and stuff. You fall into a rut with your friends and stuff, and those are really revealing interviews. But I think the MMA Museum podcast is one of those that, there's something there for everybody. Legends, and then guys that, did 50 fights and, were never paid more than $4,000 or $5,000 for it.
And what kind of feedback have you got from some of these memorabilia, shows and whatnot?
People enjoy it. It seems that people enjoy it. It seems like, I think that the MMA memorabilia community, it still has potential to really be out there and be a community of people. I think that the collection world, when we were kids, we collected comics, and then you run into the fact is that there were people buying warehouses full of comics already, just to put them in the back, and every baseball card, they just had boxes of them still sealed and stuff like that. You couldn't just be a singular collector or a guy, putting a collection together anymore. And the UFC tried to take some of the steam out of that as well. With their, they make every fighter sign a poster, 150 posters at every show now and stuff like that. That changes things from the days where, a guy was running around with a poster, maybe for multiple shows trying to get him signed and things. But I think we remember back to the old days, the days, before it was so corporate and things like that. That's our bread and butter on the history in the MMA Museum and on the collector stuff. And it's just fun. It's just fun, and people can get a real perspective of the way it was from the old days.
Well, as always, Miguel, I appreciate the time, and I think it's a great topic. And I'm kind of hoping that, maybe some from PFL watches this, because I think the two guys that you kind of settled on are probably the right ones, as from all we've discussed. It might be disappointed if one of them wasn't the person.
Yeah. Again, for the bang for their buck, I don't see like a name that's big enough. Like, there's not Mike Tyson's going to come and do this, and everybody in the world's got to be like, what, Mike Tyson? Like there's not a wow you with just a name recognition opponent unless you let him box and do Tyson Fury, and I think that's what they'll do. But it's still, once he takes that loss, then that first opponent in MMA becomes very important, because I do think that it behooves, he's got to win. He can't take two losses in a row.
Yeah. Well, I think it's a great show, Miguel. I appreciate your time, and everyone who
Todd, as always, and, thanks to everybody out there.
And everyone who supports MMA Conspiracy Hour, appreciate you. Subscribe, like, share these podcasts, and until next time, see you then.